Hello everyone, welcome to the SRC Chassis channel. Going to be going over building one of these Eliminator Pro chassis that I offer. I've had quite a few people over the years have some issues with building them. I know I don't really have an instruction video to date, or I do have an instruction manual on my website. It's kind of, it's not vague, but it gets one, I guess, assembled for you. I didn't really go into a whole lot of detail, but I just wanted to do an actual video and show kind of some complaints over the years that I've heard and go over some different things and maybe some tips and tricks to help build them a little bit easier. If you're new to the slot car world and you bought one of these, or if you're, a veteran racer and you're looking for something different to try, and this is kind of going to go over putting one of these together. So join in and hope you learn something, or I plan on doing some different videos, maybe restoring a couple of my older slot cars that I've had since I was pretty much a teenager. But this first video I want to do just an actual instructional for building an Eliminator Pro chassis. So here we go. Alright, one of the first things that I want to go over on these, starting out, this is made out of stainless steel. It isn't anything hardened or spring steel. They don't come perfectly flat. They get a little bit of heat warp in them when they're actually made. I've had them returned to me before saying that they were bent, and I can understand you'd want one to show up and be flat, but literally this is one off of the pile, and I actually have the pile here. Kind of show you. I mean, the whole pile wobbles around a bit. A lot of it has to do with the slag that's still on it when they actually do laser cut them. You can see right there off the pile. Not one of these is really truly flat. Best thing that I've come to find out is kind of get them, kind of eyeball it like this and see how it, kind of exaggerating a bend. However, you can see just how easily they actually do bend, and they, I've had them come back to me, a stack of, 2 or 3 of them that were bent like that, and returned. So, in a way, I mean, that's pretty exaggerated, but sometimes, most of the time when I grab them, I'll pull them off the pile and they're gonna be, a little bit like that. So, I mean, right there, that's pretty exaggerated, but, I mean, literally, if you just take a couple seconds, kind of eyeball it, and you can, straighten it pretty dang close. And then, your jig board, once you I actually use this jig that is made specifically for this chassis, which you can get it from Precision Slot Cars. I don't think he has it listed on his site, but if you email him, he will make them. But, I mean, that gets you the idea. I mean, it's pretty flexible stuff. Once you get it straight, eyeballed fairly close, I mean, a little bit off, but you gotta think those little links, teeny tiny thin links, hold this thing together for the majority. So it's gonna bend pretty easily in between those. As long as your main parts are pretty well straight, you can get it pretty dang flat. Then once I cut all the pieces apart, I'll individually sand all the slag off of each and every one. I don't know if you can see it at this view or not, but I have a drawer here, and I have a roll of like sticky DA sheets. I'll stick them to the bottom of the drawer and use that as a kind of a flat block to sand against. Pretty well, the fitment is pretty decent. This slot on the bottom main rail portion of the chassis, sometimes it's a tight fit for the motor plate, but I mean it'll always go in there. The slot on the top for like the ram horn or bull horn top piece for your front down struts, that usually fits okay because it has to kind of angle down, so the slot in that's a little bit bigger. Other than that, I'm trying to think of some other issues. It doesn't have a built-in, this is from a different chassis, but you can see it actually has a rear body mount kind of designed into it, which that's been a complaint in the past, but I don't know, I enjoy these chassis for the simplicity of how it's laid out, and they just go together really well for me. I'm used to making them. It does have pre-cutouts for your down struts if you want to run them up higher, but I've been running them actually down a little bit lower. Let's see. The center hole for the pinion on the plate is pretty good size. You can fit a decent sized pinion through it. I have had to take them out for giant pinions. Other than that, it's make sure it's really clean very well when you're actually going to do your soldering. Then I'm trying to think. There isn't really a whole lot of complaints otherwise. They aren't exactly the easiest to put together because if you don't have the tool with the motor block, they can be kind of tricky, but I put them together for years without this jig block, so there's ways around it. It just isn't, I guess, as fast, or, you know, you can't produce them quickly. I don't know if you're in a hurry to put it together or anything like that, but I know sometimes when I get orders for multiple cars to build chassis for different bodies, then it really makes it nice because I can pretty well crank them out, cut it apart, and, you know, I can have one done from this state to mounted to a body in a couple of hours. So it's one of those things where it's not a beginner's, you know, hobby. So you do need like a good soldering iron, a good flux. It helps to have some kind of jig board, or at very worst, the way that I used to make them, I just use this. This is a cutting board. I think I got it at Menards for like 15, 16 bucks. So it's made of the same thing that the actual jig plates or jig boards are. It just obviously doesn't have anything in it. You could drill holes and get little metal pins to kind of help you. That's how I did my very first jigs that I ever did, and then eventually let the pros handle it. So, but this here I still use for soldering on my front axle tube onto the little piece here. It just helps. That way I'm not kind of tearing up my soldering board. I just use it on this cutting board. Trying to think if there's anything else. This jig itself definitely helps. I'll show you exactly the steps that I use to make it go easier for me. These taller pins here, they might be rusted in, but I don't even really use these for the Eliminator chassis. I have a new chassis here in the background that I haven't released yet. However, that's what I was using to kind of get by making it, centering my axle and, you know, at least squaring it up with the guide and the axle. So, but this here definitely makes life easier, and I guess I'll go down my process exactly how I do this and show everyone how simple they really can be once you're used to it. So. Okay, very first step will be take your Dremel, cut this thing apart. Anytime, I guess, I don't know how well to pick it up, but I try and cut pretty well as close as I can to the part, at least on one end where you know that it's going to be where you have an actual something going to be butting up against it. That way it's easier to kind of clean up and sand up. But either way, usually you'll have to do a little bit of touching up, make sure that you grind off the little bits of tab that still stay on each piece. But I'll go in real time here and show you exactly how I cut these apart. And there we have it, real time, how easy it is to cut it apart and clean up the little tabs off of each little piece. Nothing to it. Now there will be little pieces of slag or spots where you clean it up and it might have rolled it off the edge, even though it kind of ground it all away, but it's still little pieces on there. But that's where I take my actual sandpaper. See my little piece of sandpaper there. All it is a roll. You get it at any paint supplies, or a lot of automotive stores even carry it. And it's, yeah, 80 grit is what this is. And as you can see, the longest centerpiece here, everything is pretty well laying flat. This one's the longest piece, and it's really thin, so it has a tendency to warp and bend. But I mean, it's pretty dang close. And I know I don't ever have to, but I've seen guys when they actually weld their stock car chassis, they will take and use small clamps and clamp it to the board itself, and that way it stays perfectly flat. If you're really worried about it, you can do it that way. I've never had to, and I've never had any issues, so. But that's that. From full chassis to cut apart to sanded and ready to mock up on the jig. And we are 27 minutes into with my speech, the first opening part. I don't know exactly how long, probably 10-15 minutes. So just goes to show that it's not too terribly bad. I've done hundreds of these, so I'm pretty well, I know exactly what I need to do, but just goes to show you that's pretty much all it takes to get it ready to start, soldering it together. I will take my guide tongue, just get it in place. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can just leave it however right off the bat. So right here, guide tongue, it's got a little bolt that slides back and forth on the jig there. Set that there. You can kind of set your wheelie bar holder, I guess, wheelie bar bracket, and on the board it's right at 5 inches, which a lot of different classes require no longer than a 5-inch wheelie bar. If it's a bracket car, it can be as long as you want it to be. It doesn't really matter, but for actual competing in classes, that makes sure that your wheelie bar is to spec. So we'll go there. And the motor block really makes things a lot nicer to where you can actually just bolt it together right on there. And I guess I should mention too that there is an up and a down on the plate. The easiest way that I always remembered, up is where the little tabs actually connected it together when it was in kit form. So where your little metal connecting tabs, that is the plates, that's the top of the plate. Or if you look fairly close, the little notches on the side, you can see the notches on this, skinny at the bottom, big at the top, and it corresponds the same with the motor plate. Small on the bottom, big on the top. If they don't line up, if it looks like it's kind of sticking off to one side or another, then you know that it's incorrect. I won't tighten it all the way completely, just enough to snug it down where it'll still kind of float around until I get all the pieces together on it. Then once everything is all kind of clipped into place there, then I'll go ahead and snug the screws down. Don't need to be super tight, cranked down or anything, but there's the assembled motor block. Then that's for your front wheel, your front axle, and then that will go on top of the motor block for the front down struts. Now, whatever body you're using, this will help to let you decide exactly what your front, well, I guess your wheelbase will be, but that's where your front guide tongue will be, you know, based on the length of the body, and go from there. Let me see what body I want to use to build a chassis for. What the heck? The Challenger doesn't have a body or a chassis yet. It's pretty dusty. It's been sitting up here for quite a while. But we'll go ahead and make it fit this Challenger body. What I always do, I'll kind of line the axle center line up dead in the center with the rear wheel center line on the actual wheel arch. Then I'll kind of eyeball the guide tongue. I'll slide it forward, not all the way to the very front of the front bumper, but give yourself a little bit of room. That way you kind of have a little bit to play with on your float of your body. Or just a touch more. Looks pretty good. Can actually take in, lock that down. I've got to put a couple pins in it. I was messing with this block with that new chassis design, so I have some of the pins pulled out of it. Now, you can use, I'll show you here. This is the tubing that you can buy from your local track. Or I don't know if you buy from other slot car suppliers or not, but this is the actual tubing. I haven't been using it lately. This is just some extra that I found when I was looking through some different stuff. Just goes to show you how well it fits into that jig there. It actually holds it right dead in place. You'd find the length for your main rails, as I call them. But that right there would be your bottom main rail setup. Got your guide tongue set to the length that you want it. Then you just cut it right to length. I usually just leave it right on the block, cut it, be very careful not to, or I'll even just cut it right off the back of the block, just leave just a little bit hanging off that you can trim once you're actually done with it. Once you do that, then your actual motor block will just kind of, this one's being a little bit more of a pain. So what I'll do is hit it ever so lightly right on the sides where that tab is that slides down into there. that one was a little bit more of a difficult example, and I'm glad, because that's one thing that I've had an issue with people say that it doesn't fit, or which in that case I guess technically it didn't, but literally just touch it real lightly with the Dremel. It goes right in its slot. And that right there is short of what I'm actually going to do, and I'll show you here as well. I use stainless steel TIG wire. I'm going to save these tubes for something else, something in the future when I have enough to actually do both the front and rear down struts as well out of all tubing. But I normally use the stainless TIG wire, so I'll show you exactly how I get everything mocked up. Let's see what I did with it. Okay. These right here, they're about a 3-foot section roughly. They have a flat stamped into them that says, you know, the alloy of the metal, how it is. Obviously you can't use that, or I mean I guess you could, but I always cut it off right before that, and then the same on the other end. It will take 1.5 of these roughly to build one of these Eliminator Pro chassis. So I guess if you're buying it by the pound, I don't know exactly how many pieces, roughly, oh, I want to say probably 40 pieces to a pound, because I had a 10-pound stick, and I want to say it was like 370 wires in a 10-pound stick. So 36 roughly, that's why I'd say 40 wires per pound. You're looking at, I mean, you could do quite a few of them. But yeah, out of a 1-pound stick, you could probably do roughly 30-ish cars. So if you buy a 10-pound stick, I think it's like $100 roughly. I think the one that I bought was $115. So I mean, you're able to do quite a few cars out of a 10-pound stick if that's all you're doing is nothing but slot cars. So versus the hypodermic tubing, that stuff can get pretty pricey. Not saying that it's not good stuff, because it is. It's very lightweight, but the TIG wire itself is very sturdy when it's actually all put together as well. Just a touch heavier. In a bracket car, you're never going to know the difference, but if you're trying to build like an all-out top end, like a heads-up car, then the tubing would be the way to go, just to save that extra little bit of weight that you can. But I will go ahead and cut this up here and show you how I get it all fit up from the main rails, basically the same thing, and then the down struts for the rear and the front. And there's that. Pretty simple and straightforward on these. You saw me, I kind of notch, kind of get it close. Obviously there will be a little bit you'll have to trim off, but do a little kind of a line to notch it, see where I need it, and then slide it back off the end. Cut it, that way it's not cutting into the block, and then just slide it back forward. And then the motor block is all right there in place and ready to go. And then the rear down struts, you could go up into the upper, which in my opinion, if you're going to do a big power motor in it, I would definitely go to the upper. Downside is you're going to have to notch a little bit higher into your rear bumper. Some guys, it's a big deal. Some guys it's not. Me, it kind of depends on what I'm trying to achieve, but you know, I ultimately know that with this chassis design, anything with a wheelie bar, you're going to end up having to do notch, or you're going to have to set the body up on top of it. So, just one of those things. It's all up to you as a builder and what you want the car to look like. So just go right down to the lower spot. It kind of helps, that way you don't have to notch as much out of the bumper, but it still works just as well. I think in a bigger power motor, you'd see a little bit more flex versus the higher spot, because the actual wheelie bar starts in front of the rear axle, so it's going to transfer you know, your wheelie bar, as it's putting pressure on the wheelie wheels, it's going to transfer that up the wheelie bar, and then it's going to kind of help push the front of the motor plate down. That way it's in front of the axle. So in a big motor, you know, that's a way to actually help get the power to the track, versus in a lower spot is more of an aesthetic thing where you can actually get it to clear the body a little bit better. You know what, I'm actually gonna stick them in the high spot on this because it's a bigger body. I'm not too worried about cutting farther into the bumper. I'll just kind of paint it to accent it, and we'll just go from there. You could, since it's gonna actually hold itself there in that upper position where in the bottom one it won't, just take your Dremel, mark it, get a little mark, then you can actually pull it out and cut it. And now that I know that this one is my exact length, I'll just take and hold it. Then kind of go right there, and you know that you have a mark right here. Then you can trim it and it'll be the same. Then that pretty much used up an entire piece. So then you'll use about, you know, half of another piece for the front down struts. Or me, I've got a piece here from putting a couple other together. I'll use that partially. Probably not enough to do both of them, but at least I won't have to, you know, use that much of another piece. And then do the same. You know, your pieces are going to be identical for the other side. And there's all of our pieces that we have cut out, and it is ready for soldering.